just show them I've arrived. Over. Here we go, then. I'm making my final approach now. Over. Actual time of arrival, 1100. Over and out. Phew. Well, I hope that wasn't too bad for my first solo flight. I always have the feeling that someone up there was watching over me. This helicopter is the machine you saw in that flying sequence. And despite its stunt flying and almost aerobatics, it is, of course, a model, a radio-controlled model. Radio control has been used quite a long time. It's been used in boats and ships and aircraft since before the war. But it's only just now that radio control is beginning to invade the model railway scene. This is my own back garden railway line, 6 miles long when scaled up. And there, waiting patiently to proceed, is the radio-controlled diesel-electric locomotive I built myself, the world's first. Here she comes. Even the whistle works by radio. Radio control is now being used on full-scale locomotives in Germany, where they're running their diesel shunters from a tower exactly the same way as I'm controlling my Type 4 locomotive here. Now, modeling is often the father of the full-scale thing. Trevithick's little steam carriage. Now, that's the forerunner of all trains and cars all over the world. Henson and Stringfellow built a quarter-scale model of their aerial steam carriage, which almost flew about 50 years before the Wright brothers. And, of course, Christopher Cockerell's tin can experiment. That's turned into what is now known the highly successful hovercraft. Now, I can make a perfectly good case for model making simply on the grounds that it teaches you how to handle tools, how to repair a chair, how to wire the house, how to do plumbing, and keep away the very expensive repairman. But it's the real thrill of it that makes the difference, the chance of creating a world of your own in which you are in charge, and meeting people. My friends from all over the country have come here to my garden today with their prized possessions. But they're not going to run them today. I will. I've been lucky enough to bump up against models all through my life, right back to my earliest days in Austria. My mother was Scots, but my father was the son of an Austrian baron. And we occupied a section of what was once the family palace on the Ring. That's the great boulevard of Vienna. A tram ran from the opera past our house on its way to the spa suburb of Baden. You could get a meal on board, complete with white tablecloth and fine china. And even at the early age of 3, I loved it so much that my grandfather gave me a model of the tram. Not a very accurate model. This is what the Baden tram really looked like. I built this model myself. It's an interesting tram because in Vienna it operates like a tram into the town, and outside it operates like a railway on its own track. In a way, this is what European trams are like. They're trains in towns, whereas in this country, really, they're omnibuses on tram wheels. This layout belongs to Leo Taylor and Peter Hammond. It shows all the design faults which condemned the British tram to the furnaces. The double deck makes it high and lumbering and gives it a rather swaying, uneasy ride. It has old-fashioned, noisy wheels. How many of you remember the racket trams used to make? And power to drive the vehicle comes from trolley poles which often came unstuck on corners. European trams take their power from this kind of device. It's called a pantograph, which hardly ever comes adrift. And nowadays, they also have silent wheels. I think it's the absence of those things which contributed to the failure of the British tram, whereas the Baden tram and the European trams still flourish and run very, very efficiently. But it's a sort of efficiency which is hardly romantic. So let's go back to the good old British double-decker rumbling along and give it another whirl. Another passion of my youth was toy soldiers. I always wanted to join them, get in amongst them, and fight battles with them. And now, 50 years later, it looks as if my passion is coming true, because Roy Dilly is using me as a subject for one of his military models. Roy, is this pose all right?
Yes, that's fine, Bob. Hold it right there. What I'm doing now, I've got the pose, I think, and I'm just going to clean up the joints. That's excellent. Now we're going to get down to the actual personalisation of it, Bob, and I'm going to apply your beard. This will be put on with a liquid plastic, which is made by dissolving little bits of plastic in a solvent. And this has the great advantage that you can actually paint the detail on to the model with a paintbrush. It does take a little while to harden off, but once it's hard, it is in effect welded onto the base plastic and becomes part of it.
Now that you're going to paint it, how do you go about doing that?
We start by arriving at a flesh mix which matches up with the subject's face. In your case, with a nice rosy complexion. And this is painted overall, the entire head and face area.
Mm-hmm. This is all terrifically skillful, Roy. But isn't it just simply playing at toy soldiers?
Well, no more than you chaps play with model railways, and in fact, the hobby now has developed to such an extent that it is a true art form, and you can make dioramas which in fact have a narrative and tell a story. For instance, this model of the Western Front in 1916. You can actually show people what it was like to be there. That is how the ground was broken up, the effect of high explosive and rain and barbed wire. The conditions were so appalling. And how much more appalling they would have been for men trying to get forward over it. There is a roadway or a pathway laid, duck boarding as it was called, or trench boarding, so that the men aren't actually standing on the ground but standing on wood above the ground. Underneath that there were drains dug. You can see a sapper here, look, with his spade and his little pickets, where he's trying to repair a part of the trench that has actually been subject to a direct hit by a shell. The sordidness of trench warfare is brought out in the model by the fact that we've got a little dump of empty tin cans. Well, they may well be empty food cans, but in fact they were used by the troops as improvised latrines. The men living under these appalling conditions in the trenches nevertheless made some sort of pathetic attempts to turn the trench into home. You had this situation existing for nearly 4 years, you see, on the Western Front, whereas in our war there was relative mobility. People got about.
Roy, it'll be a relief to get away from Dennis Green's model of this hateful situation. Let's turn to the lesser horrors of the Second World War's battlefields. How are you getting on with painting your Western Desert model?
Well, there's your finished self, Bob.
Yes, I wish I were as slim as that nowadays.
Well, let's put you back into the mid-war years in the Western Desert. Go and have a cup of tea with some of the boys outside Tobruk.
I suppose I look slightly out of place amongst all these soldiers, but I was there all right. I can still remember the taste of their tea and the flasks of Chianti they sometimes liberated, I think is the word. We all got together occasionally because I was serving with His Majesty's Navy in the Eastern Mediterranean, sailing small ships out of Alexandria. That's it, hold on that course. Steady she goes, Cox.
Steady she goes, sir.
This is the very first MTB ever built. Nowadays, she's run by the Sea Scouts, and she has a glorious history, including being flagship at Dunkirk. Although my service was in the Mediterranean and not in a channel, service conditions on board these boats were very much alike. Line of sight navigation normally, it's only when you went out to sea that you held a course, as you do in big ships. You then wrote it down on a blackboard like this, and then one of our ratings used the chalk to make little tiny chalk models like this out of them. The trouble was, these models never survived because the chalk was used again and the models were literally written off. But the art of making small-scale ship models is still alive. Phil Warren makes his out of nothing but matchboxes and matchsticks.
I'm just putting the last piece of decking on the deck of the model of HMS Scimitar, which is the modern equivalent of the ship that we're on now. It's a fast training boat and carries no weapons at all. It's just purely built for speed in training exercises. And when finished, will look like her sister ship, the Cutlass. The toolkit is simply this. I have a razor blade for cutting the wood and the matchsticks, a 6-inch steel rule, and a small pair of tweezers, and that's a lot.
How many ships have you got in your fleet?
125 in the whole fleet, ranging from aircraft carriers down to the Scimitar. And one of the nicest ships in the fleet is the Sheffield, the Navy's latest Type 42 destroyer. Still made in exactly the same way, with framework of matchsticks. Wood from the box is the plating. Now, using that wood from the box, we can also make all sorts of details work. This very fine radar is simply that wood cut up. Bits of radar can revolve on a matchstick spindle. Missiles can revolve and elevate, also on matchstick spindlers. There's no pins or wires, no cheating at all. Guns revolve and elevate. And all the little tiny details, such as the carbus as used there, all made out of the matchwood.
The curious thing about Phil Warren is that although he reckons he's used 50,000 matches to build his fleet, he doesn't smoke. Many years after the war, we moved out here, because I suppose you always go back to what you grow up in. And this little place out here, not far from London, reminds me, with its hills and its trees, very much of Austria. We also had a place in the country where electricity hadn't really reached yet, and most of the power came from agricultural steam engines, just as it did in the last century. And here they all are, once again hard at work. This is the world that has passed away. Alan Johnson's gypsy caravan has vanished from the roads and market towns. The thunder of Graham Hunt's Fowler agricultural engine no longer echoes across the fields. And at the end of the war, a flood of ex-army diesel engines drove out the originals of Edward Allen's Fairground steam engine. These beautiful models are one way to recall those pleasures of long ago. But for the moment, let's concentrate on the working day, steam ploughing especially. This is quite sophisticated and just as exciting as the modern machine. By finally adjusting the pull on the throttle, the plough makes a clean furrow at a very precise depth. But if you want to have a look at the mechanical nightmare, here's one to have a go at. Colin Tyler's Derby Digger. I don't think they made very many of them. I first came across one of them in a 1890 edition of Punch, where it displayed it with a cartoon saying it's ideal for featherbed farmers. The claws spread 14 feet 6 inches from end to end, and the machine weighed over 8 tons. It seems somewhat of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and I certainly wouldn't have liked to have driven it. Now this is much more sensible. Hewbridge Engine Centre's thrashing train. I just feed in this year's best crop of wheat, like this. The chaff goes out on the shakers, and the grain goes down to the bottom. And in real life, it would have been taken to the local miller and ground into flour for homemade bread. Absolutely delicious. What a thought. right to between the wars, whole farming areas had to depend on steam to make their power and electricity, and they coped with it very well indeed. And when we bought this house, we were in exactly the same position. We had no mains electricity. So now it gives me great pleasure to make my own. And this is where the knowledge gained from making models really pays off. Some friends and I put this lovely old steam engine in a shed in our garden. I burn wood from our own trees, and we can even use oil from the stump of the motor car. And here it is, working extremely well. Oh, we're going up to about 90 pounds per square inch, about 12 bars, running extremely neatly, 3.5 kilowatt output. And if any lights anywhere else fail, we'll still be on power. Mind you, when my wife wants to use the washing machine, boy, do I have to keep on stoking. But quite apart from that, it's really great fun to have my own power station here in my own garden. And I'm almost independent of the use of petrol. Mind you, not that I'm fanatical about it, because car driving was once a big thing in my life. It really adds something to motoring, driving a car like this in surroundings like these. Now, this is an MGTC built in 1948, and I had a car just like this, and I wish I still had it. Unfortunately, I wrote mine off at Silverstone some time ago. But nowadays, here behind Lilford Hall, there are cars 2 feet long that put me to shame. These radio-controlled model racing cars hit speeds of more than 60 miles per hour here at Lilford Park Circuit, which, if you scaled it up, would be well in excess of 400 miles per hour. This is a practice session for the European Championships. Nearly 100 drivers are taking part from 11 countries. Members of the fancied British team include Dave Martin, Keith Plested, who also builds some of the cars, and Phil Greeno, the current world champion. You know, this doesn't feel like a model car racing set at all, especially here in the pits, where all the excitement of maintaining and tuning the car is exactly like the real thing.
Yes, this is the only radio-controlled sport where it's competition against the next man and not on a point system. One can see one's position and you know who you're racing. It's fantastic.
You have to be competitive, you have to get a good lap time, and you have to qualify for a final. So you've got to go very well, win your heats, go through to the final. The fuel is kept cool, and in very hot conditions, you can put it in the freezer. Now, this is because the fuel tanks are in fact limited in the size we can use. But if you put the fuel in the freezer and keep it really cool, you can get it to contract, which means that you can get more fuel in the tank. Now, in the long race, this is helpful because you therefore have to make less stops for fuel. It's great when you win. You never think you're going to win, but it's great when you do win.
Driving skill and technique wins races just as in real life. Watch the first 3 cars head into the next bend, too tight. And now see how the 4th driver swings wide for a perfect turn. The accidents look horrific, but of course they're never fatal. Dave Martin survived the pile-ups to become European sports car champion, and the British team gained most of the top places. It's good to see them doing so well. But it doesn't change my feeling that the transport system of the future, with oil being in short supply, will be the railways. I've always felt that they have a chance. In the days when Dr. Beeching chopped off branch lines with a blunt axe, I tried to resurrect one of them, the Waverley Line, the line that runs between Carlisle and Edinburgh. Unfortunately, nothing came of it. But one thing I learned during the planning and the preparation of feasibility studies is that being master of one's own railway system is a very exciting thing. And no doubt the same thought is behind what I consider the world's finest model railway, Pendon in Long Wittenham in Oxfordshire. None of their locomotives is more than 2 inches high.
Millersdale for Tideswell, Kirby Muxlow, Malcop and Scholar Green. No more will I go to Blandford Forum and Morty Ho. On the slow train from Midsummer Norton and Mumby Road. No churns, no porter, no cat on a seat at Chorlton come Harney or Chester Street. We won't be meeting again on the slow train. I'll travel no more from Littleton Badsy to Openshaw. At Long Santon I'll stand well clear of the doors no more. No whitewashed pebbles, no up and no down, from Formby Four Crosses to Dunstable Town. I won't be going again on the slow train. On the main line and the good siding, the grass grows high at Dog Dyke, Tumby Woodside and Trouble House Halt. The sleepers sleep at Audlam and Ambergate. No passenger waits on Chittering platform or Cheslin Hay. No one departs, no one arrives, from Selby to Boole, from St. Earth to St. Ives. They've all passed out of our lives on the slow train, on the slow train. Cockermouth for Buttermere, on the slow train. Armley Moor, Adam, Pie Hill and Summercoats, on the slow train. Windmill End,
This is the signal that marked the departure of the last train by coming on, as it's known professionally. But it bounced. Now, model signals normally go snip, snap. They don't bounce because they have no weight, but this one had. And Stuart Hine is the man who introduced artificial gravity. Stuart, how did you do it?
Well, obviously I couldn't find room for the weight of a full-size signal. But then I thought about the way a seesaw bounces on its stop when it's just off balance. So I put in a seesaw on very light bearings and balanced it so that it was just tipping, and that's how it works.
Now, Stuart is the man who introduced many brilliant ideas into the model railway world. One of his latest is the introduction of photo etching to make small parts very precisely. They look right, they function right. Stuart, how do you go about making those?
Well, basically, photo etching has been around for a long time. The image of the parts you want, in this case a bogie, is laid down photographically on both sides of a sheet of brass, and then the whole lot goes in an etching bath. Don't forget your eye shield, Bob.
And what happens now?
Well, the chemicals in the bath eat away the metal in the areas that aren't covered by the photographic material. Of course, it isn't the kind of thing that people should do at home, but there are plenty of firms in the business who'll do it for you.
How long does the process actually take, Stuart?
Well, if you do it in a bath like this, it probably takes half an hour. The machines use the etchant hot and they spray it on, and it takes perhaps a minute.
Well, how do you turn that into a bogie now?
First of all, you have to separate the pieces. Quite a lot of the pieces have to be bent as well. Then you solder them together.
Now, what's the advantage of making a bogie like that? Compare that with the conventional system.
Well, here is a conventional bogie, made of rather heavy castings, not a lot of detail, and unsprung. Now, here's one of these made up. Not only has it got rather better detail, but also it's sprung.
Well, Stuart, I've got just the right train waiting to try this out, so let's mount a carriage on a set of these bogies and give the springing a test run. Here's another new idea, like my radio-controlled diesel-electric locomotive, which gives you a chance of having your controls in your hand and not in the cab. This is a steam locomotive, a Battle of Britain-class loco built by Dick Moger, and that is radio-controlled. It's fired by gas because nobody has produced radio-controlled coal yet. But this is a very sophisticated design. There is an electronic water gauge. It shows green to indicate that the water level in the boiler is okay. All I have to do is open the regulator, and away she goes. Well, come on then. And there, floating beautifully on Stuart's new bogies, goes the end carriage. That locomotive by Dick Moger shows that technical development is still possible with the old steam train, which became first a feasible proposition about 150 years ago. In 1829 precisely, when George Stephenson's rocket took the laurels at the Rainhill trials. This 5-inch gauge model was built by Robert Markham from the original drawings. Rocket was an amazing technical triumph of its time, because if you care to think of it, one of the competitors at Rainhill trial was called the Cycloped and was driven by a horse on a treadmill. Rocket reached a maximum speed of 24 miles an hour, and an intriguing thought for people who object to pollution, it consumed its own smoke by a forced air blast up the stack. The main problem of making small-scale models of old locos is that everything is so small. Now, certain things like the friction of the pistons in the cylinders and the behavior of water and steam in pipes simply won't scale down. And there's nobody better than Dennis Wilkinson of Reading to solve these problems. Have a look at his Great Northern Atlantic here. Here is the brake valve in the cab. It's a steam brake, and it works absolutely perfectly. And it's the right size. And here's the regulator. It's a scale size regulator, exactly the same size in the loco, and it does its job just as it ought to. Now, the next model in this Museum of Railway History is Vic Doswell's French PLM loco. This engine was built in the 1870s and ran from Paris through Lyon to the Mediterranean, hence the word PLM. The French railway engineers were always very meticulous about their engine design, very forward-going, and they even kitted out their engine drivers and firemen with gas masks so that they wouldn't suffocate through the tunnels. But they let them down their ideas when they streamlined the PLM engines because simply they weren't going fast enough. A French railway engineer was also responsible for the nuttiest railway design ever in the 1880s in Ireland. It went by the name of Listowel and Ballybunion monorail. I kid you not. It ran through the country, had 10 miles of track and no level crossings. It had bridges, drawbridges, which opened like a bascule, like the Tower Bridge, and closed again when the train had gone. The real problem was one of balance. If 5 Irishmen wanted to travel, they had to balance the 2 fat ones on one side with the 3 thin ones the other side. I wonder whether they did with a load of pigs. The line finally expired in 1924, just as 20 years of experiment came to an end with another form of transport, the biplane. Colonel S.F. Cody's machine won the Michelin Cup for the longest, fastest flight in 1910. These models are made by Tim Elsmore, who's been in aviation since the early 20s. This biplane was originally designed by Geoffrey de Havilland. It flew tail first, driven by the pusher propeller at the back, and was called the canard, French for duck or spoof. Ducks can't fly tail first, so I think spoof is the better translation. Many of these planes had advanced design. This is one of Horace Short's experiments with multi-engined aircraft. The counter-rotating propellers cut down the tendency of the machine to swing to one side. So nothing could be more misleading than the affectionate nickname they went by of string bags. Just look at her. Isn't she a thing of delicacy and beauty? This type of thing is only preserved for very specialized kinds of aircraft today. But a little more robustness is needed for real flying, like this version of a 1916 Mannock fighter. And here comes the trickiest craft of all to handle, that Bell Jet Ranger helicopter I flew earlier on. The controllers of these aircraft are two of the country's greatest experts on radio-controlled flying. Dave Boddington, who owns the plane, supplies them for stunt flying sequences and films. David Neiman does the same with his helicopters.
A full-scale helicopter, you have some direct feedback from the machine because you're actually in it, apart from the fact that you have instruments and a horizon to watch, and you've got a much better feel for the machine. The model helicopter is at a distance, and you've got to see some definite movement before you can react to it. You can liken it to the feel of flying a model helicopter to balancing a pole in your upturned palm, one in each hand. And when the model is coming towards you, all the controls being reversed, you can, if you move your hands across the front of yourself so that your right hand is now on the left-hand side of your body, it's like performing the same balancing act in that sort of configuration, which takes a lot of getting used to.
I think everybody would agree that a fixed wing, both model and full size, are easier to fly than rotary wing aircraft. But nevertheless, there are very real challenges. And whereas Dave Neiman has gone on to helicopters, I'm still at the moment finding plenty of challenges to keep me going with the fixed wing aircraft.
Well, what is it that you can do that he can't do?
There are one or two things that I can do that he certainly can't. Now, how about a loop, Dave? Can you do a loop?
Well, up until recently that was a bit fraught, but we've got some quite sophisticated models now that are capable of loops.
I know you can go backwards, which certainly with a fixed wing we can't, but I suppose one thing that you can't do yet, and that is to go inverted, and we can do that.
Not for very long. We can go inverted. We are actually rolling helicopters now, and they are inverted, but not for very long. That would be a little bit too much to ask.
I think helicopters need just a little bit more concentration. And I think sometimes if you could have a look at your face when you're flying it, you'd see the concentration written all over it.
I agree. Concentration is the major part of it, but it comes with practice. The skills of flying helicopters are something you learn slowly.
Dave Boddington, how do you go about making a model look real?
There's lots of tricks of the trade. We have to get the atmosphere of the aeroplane right. We have to make sure that the texture of the covering of the model is right. If it's an early type aircraft, they were covered with linen, and so we cover them in a lightweight nylon, and this gives the right sort of texture. We then find that it is very necessary to really dirty these aircraft up, to accentuate this, to make it more than perhaps would appear on the real aircraft. This is the important thing, to really create the atmosphere of the full-size aircraft so that when people see it on the screen, they honestly don't know whether it is a model or the full-size thing.
You flew the models for the series Wings, didn't you?
Oh yes, we had a great deal of fun doing that. And there, certainly with the first series of Wings, we were all learning. One sequence, for instance, where we really tried to create the atmosphere well, not just with the aircraft, but with ACAC guns and the lot. It's a sequence where there's a very young, raw recruit pilot come to the Western Front, and he's flying with an experienced pilot, Charles Galian, who's leading him. He disobeys instructions and goes in to try to find this German gun, with, I'm afraid, dire results.
The man who operated this anti-aircraft gun and incidentally shot down one of our own pilots is Michael John Harris of the BBC Special Effects Department. Mike, what's the difference between people like yourself and model makers like myself?
Well, I think the main difference is that for me, model making is not an end in itself. It's a means to another end, the achieving of reality, real effects, conviction in filming.
And how do you go about fitting a model into a situation?
Well, circumstances alter cases, but basically the principle is that you build a bit of model landscape to the scale of any particular model you want to use, and then merge that model landscape into the existing landscape about us. And if you've got the right scale, the right circumstances, textures, lighting, it all works.
Now, I have a surprise for you. I have here Gerald Wingrove's magnificent scale model of a Bentley. It's absolutely perfect.
Oh, it's the most beautiful model, this. Oh,
Look at the
beautiful.
toolkit inside the door, where you expect to see
Yes.
it. Look at the actual finished...
stone guards.
Yes, stone guards, the compressor,
Supercharger.
supercharger. Even the sleeving on the stuff is correct.
Yes.
You see, that's the sort of thing I would have liked to have owned.
Well, it looks as though it should go in front of your house, Bob, on a drive.
But of course I haven't got a drive.
Well, perhaps we'll make one for you.
Well, Mike, that's very good. I suppose it would have made your task easier if I handed you a larger model, but it really looks as if there's a road there. But Mike, when you have to make models for complicated drama programs like Anna Karenina, for instance, and you have to start from scratch, foreground and all, what do you do?
There you have an example of a model made for television.
But why use a model?
Well, it's a bit expensive going to Russia in the winter, and film crews cost an awful lot out there.
Well, when you make a model like that, where do you make it?
We make it here in this model stage of ours. It's a case of putting it together on the spot.
Well, where do you put it down? Where's the model?
This is it. This is what you see.
You're joking.
No, we just stand it all together. There's no point in fixing anything down that isn't necessary. We stand it together, heap it up, dress it in the right way, and there's your model.
Oh, just like that?
Just like that.
And afterwards?
Afterwards, well, you film it. I'll show you how it's done. We start off with some salt. This makes the snow. Well, it's cheap. It's a very good substitute for snow itself. And it handles very well. There are all sorts of qualities about it you can use for dressing. And when you first lay it out, it's damp like this. And it got the right sort of broken quality of snow. Having got the salt into place, the next thing I'd do would be to build up the background hills using ordinary paper, just ordinary grey paper, bent, twisted, just stapled into place, very, very simply and roughly. The whole point is that the more the paper is bent and broken, the better the look of the hill outline when you're finished. Then this trough that we have here, left here, is where the train will run. in due course. What it needs now is a few trees. Most model trees of this sort are usually far too regular and, I don't know, Christmas cakey. Trees in the wild never look very regular, they're always knocked about by the wind and weather. A bit of roughness and general wear and tear is a good thing. And a good idea is to use one of these ordinary kitchen sieves, and you can put the snow on very comfortably like that. We'll leave that like that for a moment. Beginning to look all right. Last of all, I think it needs a bit of foreground dressing. Have a look through the viewfinder and see what you think.
That's quite remarkable. And the moment you've got this model on film, the whole thing is destroyed. It took how long to set it up? An hour? It's a short life and a chilly ending. Do you make any other models?
Oh, obviously, yes. We cover all the models there are, Doctor Who models. In fact, one of my colleagues, Matt Irvin, is responsible for a very high standard of model making in Doctor Who itself.
Matt, what's this spaceship for?
This was made, Bob, for Doctor Who, recent Doctor Who, The Stones of Blood. I'm just adding a few additional technological bits and pieces to it.
What are they?
Well, basically, they're the outside bits and pieces that make the craft look right.
Well, why do you put them on?
People expect them to be there.
And what sort of materials do you use?
Nowadays, plastic, I would say 95% of the time. With the advent of this sort of piece, it's made our job considerably easier. A few years ago, I'd have said wood or cardboard.
We used to use wood for this sort of thing. It does look like wood, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is, of course, a rather unique example because the original is wood. But you can see here that the wood still looks like wood and would need a lot of work on it.
Well, to make it look like metal.
Yes, so with the plastic, of course, that stage is completely overcome.
And what sort of material, what sort of bits and pieces do you get to make it look real? What are your engines made of?
In this particular case, I've used parts of drain pipes, filters, and as you can see, once sprayed, they become fairly convincing alien engines.
Having put the whole lot together and sprayed it in the sort of space colour you consider right, how do you make it look worn, you know, as if it's flown about?
The secret is dirt. Although technically a spacecraft needn't necessarily pick up any dirt in space, people expect it to look a bit grubby. So 1 can of paint, and as you can see, the mottled effect gives it that dirty, worn look. It's no overall colour by any means, but from a distance, it just makes it look real.
In the feature film business, this kind of model may take months to outline and film, but Matt Irvin's work is done in a few hours. And now, here comes the Doctor Who spaceship. Rather more solidly based on real life is Pendon Village in Oxfordshire. The model's only partly completed, though it's been building for nearly 50 years. It preserves the beauty of old villages in Whitehorse Vale, now being destroyed by modern improvements. The people building Pendon Parva invited me to speak the commentary which guides the visitors round. The wagon and horses was Pendon's first model. The thatch is made of Chinese human hair, but that costs over £7 a pound. So now we use plumber's hemp, which is equally good and much cheaper. And this is the house of the manager at the watermill. All the buildings are copied from known originals. This is Curtis Cottage from Uffington, and they're all accurate down to the individual bricks and stones. Not far away is the primitive Methodist chapel. Just look at that spalled brickwork. The chapel itself no longer exists, but the joy of Pendon is to put the clock back. The work's hard, but there's no crime and not much sickness apart from Zippy, the ailing pony. It's all very quiet. Even ruin and decay seem not so much an intrusion as a natural part of the scene. How pleasant it would be to shrink to model size and scale down modern problems as well. But now that I'm here, the social pressures are exactly the same as in real life. Just look at his garden. Why can't I have a garden like that? He's got gladioli, hypericum, mombretia, and his nasturtiums are growing like weeds. Everything you need in a cottage garden. Maybe he goes in for more watering than I do. Watering. Just about opening time at the wagon and horses. Morning, George. Morning, Harry. Good bunch around here, but they don't say much. Well, even if you're only 3/4 of an inch high, it's still very refreshing after a hard day. But I must be getting on with my journey. I've always wanted to drive one of these, even if it's only as far as the depot. I see Colin Tyler needs a hand with his steam ploughing. That's the trouble with these lovely old steam engines. First of all, you've got to be almost an athlete to get onto them, and then you've always got to do something to keep them going. That's my train. I'm afraid Colin Tyler will have to manage on his own. Hey, wait for me! It's the ideal way to complete the journey, by train, riding in the cab. Well, I hope you enjoyed this journey through the world of models and model makers as much as I have. But after this, life full size will never be the same again. I must go now, so goodbye. Goodbye.